Welcome everyone to this webinar for Voltaic Strategic Resources, ASX code VSR. Shortly, I'll introduce Chief Executive Michael Walshe, who will run through a presentation on the company, including a summary on the Tea Tree lithium and Paddy's Well rare earths projects, including recent milestones and future events. At the completion of the presentation, you will have the opportunity to put questions to both Michael and Exploration Manager Claudio, who is sitting in the room with Michael now, and put those questions to them directly. So as the presentation is occurring, think through any questions you may have that you would like to put to either of the gentlemen. Submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and I will put them to Michael during the Q&A. Okay, let's get started. I'd now like to introduce Voltaic Strategic Resources CEO Michael Walshe, who will give a presentation. Michael, over to you.
Thanks, David. Yeah, the general purpose of this presentation is really just to give investors an update on our latest announcements. We've had a very busy couple of weeks, and it's also an opportunity for any new investors to ask any questions that they might have. So yeah, we'll kick it off. This is Claudio, our Exploration Manager, and I'm myself, Michael Walshe. Next slide, please. The usual disclaimer to read at your own pleasure. So first of all, just a brief overview of the company. Next slide, please. So Voltaic, we were born last October. We listed at 2 cents in October, and our focus primarily has been in the Gascoyne region of Western Australia. We do have projects also in Meekatharra and in Nevada. However, our focus over the last 7 months since listing has solely been on the Gascoyne, but we will soon get to the other projects. We're a critical minerals focused explorer, so that primarily means rare earths and battery metals, but we do also have some gold and base metals prospectivity in Meekatharra and also in the Gascoyne. And the initial pitch was that we're a low enterprise value company that's really leveraged to exploration success, and I think we've now demonstrated that success in recent weeks. And this presentation is really just going to focus on our two flagship projects, Paddy's Well and Tea Tree in the Gascoyne. Next slide, please. A quick corporate snapshot, so our capital structure as of the 12th of May, a couple of days ago. So as I said, we listed at 2 cents in October. We have had a nice share appreciation in recent weeks, primarily due to some announcements at our Tea Tree lithium project. So we're currently sitting at around 5 cents. Shares on issue at the moment is around 420 million. And we've just undertaken a very successful capital raise where we've raised over $7 million. It was heavily oversubscribed. And we, after completion of both tranche 1 and tranche 2 of that raise, we will have an additional $7 million in the kitty. So almost $10 million in total we will have going forward. In terms of ownership, this will be updated once we have all the details from the tranche 1 and tranche 2 placements, but essentially, yeah, our top shareholder is our main vendor, and the board management hold currently around 6% of the company. Next slide, please. Just a quick snapshot on the board. So I think for a junior explorer, we've got all the right skills that we need to progress forward. Capital markets experience, extensive in the form of John Hannaford. He's our chairman. He's been a part of several ASX listed companies, and he's been around for over 30 years in the business. David Izzard, our non-exec, he's a very successful entrepreneur in his own right in mining services. Simon, very experienced CFO, company secretary. And Lachlan, our non-exec technical director, he's currently MD at Mount Monger Resources and has had several previous positions in exploration companies. Claudio, I believe is one of the best rare earth geologists in Australia. He's now got 2 rare earth discoveries that he can under his name. So Browns Range, Northern Minerals, he was part of the discovery team for that very important deposit. It's considered a strategic project for Australia because of the presence of heavy rare earths. And he's also in recent years discovered Azra Minerals Ytria deposit, which is a heavy rare earth and scandium prospect. So very, very seasoned operator. Myself, I've got an extensive career in metallurgy, chemical engineering type background, primarily in lithium and rare earths for the last, say, 8-10 years. So I think as a junior explorer, we're really set up to drive all of our projects forward. Next slide, please. And one more, please. So on our Gascoyne projects, the Gascoyne, it's been an unloved area compared to other regions in Western Australia in terms of exploration, but it's really come to life in the last, say, 3-4 years. There's been major success stories like Dreadnought Resources at their Mangaroon rare earth project. And more recently as well, Delta Lithium, who were called Red Dirt Metals, they bought a project called Yinyathara for $25 million last year. And ourselves, we've got Paddy's Well and Tea Tree that are quite close to both of those prospects. Paddy's Well is primarily a rare earth play. Tea Tree is primarily a lithium play. And we've got other projects, Talga Kuline, that we will get to later on in Q3, Q4. But over the last 6 months since listing, all of our focus has been at Tea Tree and Paddy's Well. And I'll get to the details on those next. So next slide, please. So Tea Tree, we put out an announcement last week documenting our success from our very first drill campaign. It was a very modest drill campaign, sub 1,000 meters. What we were targeting was lithium-bearing pegmatites, and we've definitely found some very interesting pegmatites so far. Very, very successful initial program. So hats off to Claudio for his very impressive targeting. This corridor where we're in, we've called it the Voltaic corridor. It's at least 80 kilometers long, and there's just pegmatites outcropping at surface throughout that whole 80 kilometers. So our Tea Tree North, which is at the top of that corridor, we've been up there. There's pegmatites at surface there. Tea Tree South, where we spent the majority of our time and where the drill program was focused, we've now identified several hundred pegmatites at surface there. So pegmatite is the potential host rock for lithium mineralization. And we just done this initial campaign at the Andrada prospect, where the primary target from the campaign was to understand the pegmatites and how they perform at depth in more detail, understand the continuity, the dip, the strike, etc. And we now have that data. We're currently waiting on assays. We should have the assays in the next 5 weeks. Hopefully, and this Andrada prospect was targeted so that we could get early data, because access up here is quite challenging, and Andrada basically didn't require us to build any tracks into our prospects. And essentially, if we did have to build tracks, we would have had to have much longer POW approval times and the like. So we now have good data from Andrada, and our next focus will be getting more to the east towards our Morpheus target, and the information that we will get from this drilling really will set the tone for how we improve our targeting going forward. We're soon to embark on several geophysical surveys, including ground gravity, which we will be the first in the area to trial ground gravity, which our Canadian colleagues have been very successful in using to identify pegmatite prospects and understand their continuity. And so it's a really exciting prospect. Our neighbor Delta Lithium, they're furiously drilling nearly 100,000 meters into that prospect. They've had the benefit of 4 years of exploration behind them to get to where they currently are. And yeah, we're less than 6 months in, and we're very, very encouraged by what we're seeing. Next slide, please. So just a quick snapshot from the announcement we made last week about the intercepting pegmatites from surface, and very, very substantial widths from surface. 58 meters was our best hole so far, and that's open at depth. And logistics and planning are now being fast-tracked for our follow-up phase 2 campaign, which we hope to perhaps commence in July, August this year. Next slide, please. So just some cross sections. You can see that everything is open at depth, and these are just this is just our first sub 1,000 meters into this prospect. Next slide, please. Just an example of the outcropping pegmatites at surface. It really, you have to go on ground to really understand what we're talking about when we say that they're just everywhere. We've now got several hundred pegmatites mapped. The image on the right shows that they have many different forms, and Claudio here has some nice specimens of some very large crystal, highly fractionated rocks that we've collected. The fractionation is a key component in terms of vectoring towards an LCT, lithium, cesium, tantalum target. And we're really encouraged by just the size of crystals that we're seeing, how fractionated the rocks are. And these are all key, like, geochemical components into a fertile lithium system. So fertile meaning that it's you've got potential economic viability from your lithium, cesium, or tantalum. Next slide, please. Just a quick snapshot of the upcoming plans at T3. So geophysical surveys, photogrammetry for identifying pegmatites using basically a high resolution camera. And once we have all this geophysical data and also some soil sampling that's now underway, we will then form the next level of our priority 1 targets for the next drill campaign. So lots of active and material news flow to come over the next several quarters. Next slide, please. And then onto our Paddy's Well rare earth project. This is also in the Gascoyne. It's a bit further southwest compared to T3. We're a long strike from our peers, Kingfisher Metals. They had made a rare earth discovery at Mixwell about a year ago, and they had identified this 32-kilometer corridor that's prospective the whole way along for rare earth mineralization. We've got at least 32 kilometers an extension of that corridor. Our first initial field trip to Paddy's Well resulted in us pegging or adding 450% to the land holding because of the prospectivity that we're seeing. A lot of the mapping that was done by GSWA doesn't reflect the reality. We saw several major fault systems outcropping at surface, whereas the GSWA would have mapped that as all deep basement undercover. So lots of prospectivity. We grabbed as much ground as we could. It's especially important considering that the valuation of land in the Gascoyne has really gone up in recent times. The project had some historical drill holes from uranium explorers. So there's lots of thorium anomalies throughout this region. Thorium is a radioactive element, and it's one of the key kind of vectoring metals that our peers like Dreadnought and Hastings have used successfully to target their ironstone rare earth targets. And Paddy's Well has got several thorium anomalies. That's what drew all the uranium guys in the 80s, 90s. Cameco, in particular, they put in some diamond holes in the 1990s. And when we reviewed some of the assay data from that drilling, there was quite anomalous rare earths, and they didn't assay for all of the rare earths. And they had some weird sampling kind of methods where they only sampled 5 centimeters from each meter. But even though there was still quite anomalous rare earths, our purpose of our first drill campaign was to essentially twin those results and prove that there were rare earths in the system. And again, we did a very modest sub 1,000 meter campaign, and we've more than demonstrated that the rare earths are definitely, there's a major rare earth clay system, at least here at Paddy's Well. So we've got really encouraging initial results, like up to almost 80 meters of continuous rare earth clay mineralization. And there's also several primary carbonatite type targets as well. So the historical holes that Cameco put in also show some fractures in the deeper basement. So once you get out of the clays into the basement, there's also some fractures that have rare earths in them, which is very encouraging for a potential like primary hard rock type rare earth targeting as well. And we've barely scratched the surface here. It's 1,300 kilometers squared of ground, and we've barely tested less than 6 kilometers by 2 kilometers. So huge potential here. Next slide, please. And this is just a cross section of the initial first 2 holes where we've got grades up to a 1% TREO. That's over just 1 meter, but the entire horizon from surface to 78 meters basically is mineralized in rare earths. So there's something definitely significant going on here. One encouraging factor that the rare earths here are enriched in the magnet rare earths, in particular neodymium, praseodymium, which again, the Hastings Janjibana project and also Dreadnought's Ying, they're also got similar type of magnet rare earth ratios where 25% approximately of your rare earth basket is neodymium, praseodymium, that's what you need basically for an economic prospect. So this is just our first two deeper holes into this system, and we think this is the widest rare earth clay intercept that's been published. I certainly haven't been able to find any wider rare earth intercept bigger than 78 meters from surface. So very encouraging. Next slide, please. This is just a cross section of that historical Cameco drill hole. So this is what drew us into the area originally, and as you can see, it does go down to basement, and there is also rare earths in the basement fractures as well. And we're currently doing some scanning electron microscope work to identify what minerals are causing that anomalism in the primary hard rock, in the target sample, basically. Next slide, please. And then just an update what we're doing. So we've got at least 6 kilometers by 2 kilometers of these clays identified. We're getting 1,000 ppm from the PXRF, the device that you use in the field to identify the approximate concentration of metals. We're getting 1,000 ppm continuous contours, multi kilometers apart. So there's definitely a huge clay system here, and we could realistically drill this for the next year, 2 years, and not be finished, and have several 100 million tons probably of clay hosted rare earths. But we've decided not to do that. We want to get onto the metallurgy straight away, because essentially, if you don't have a leachable rare earth prospect, then having 100 million ton resource plus is pointless. So that's why we've decided to do metallurgy straight up, and that work is now underway. And here's just a flow sheet of what the work will look like. Essentially, we're going to do what's called size by assay analysis to see where are the rare earths predominantly within the particle size distribution. And in reality, it's likely that they're all in the ultra-fine fraction, which means anything, say, less than 50 microns. And we're going to basically only do the leach test work on that fine fraction, because that's how you would, in reality, likely operate a full-scale plant. And the work will basically characterize the rare earths that are in the system. How much of them are truly ionic? I'll get to what ionic means in a minute. And then how much are in the more refractory or harder to leach fractions. The ionic question is really important. It's essentially the majority of the world's heavy rare earths over the last, say, 20 years have come from ionic clay deposits in China and Mongolia. And they basically use it's essentially a fertilizer, ammonium sulfate, and a small bit of acid to get their leaching to happen. And if any of these clay projects need excessive acid, in my opinion, they won't be viable. So if you have to drop your pH below 4, it's getting into high acid territory, which you not only consume a lot of extra acid, but you will also pull a lot of gangue minerals into solution that you don't want. So if you have to drop your pH down to 1, even 0, I think it's essentially not an economic prospect. So if we find that we're not getting decent recoveries using this basic ammonium sulfate and medium pH 4, then we will stop chasing clays and only focus on our primary hard rock targets. We think that's the most prudent and smart thing to do to conserve capital. But it certainly wouldn't kill the Paddy's Well project. As I said, we've got several primary carbonatite targets that we haven't even begun to scratch the surface on yet. Next slide, please. And just one other additional thing that's encouraging for potential ionic clay at NEO. So we did some early scanning electron microscope work on the diamond core that Cameco did back in the 1990s. We actually found some of that core out in the field. It was very well preserved. We got some of that core analyzed, and we've identified the mineral halloysite, which is it's essentially kaolin, which is an alumina silicate mineral that's rolled up into a tubular shape. And if you read the literature, most of the Chinese ionic deposits have a large amount of halloysite present. So we're encouraged by that, and that will hopefully lead to some favorable leaching characteristics, which we'll have those results in about 4 weeks, all going to plan. Next slide, please. And here's just a snapshot of the months ahead at Paddy's Well. So again, geophysics, some of that mineral characterization work we're doing, SEM, scanning electron microscope. And once we have all the geophysical targets identified and some additional soil sampling that's currently underway as well, we will then have our next level of targets, and our next level of drilling should hopefully happen in the middle of June and potentially in August as well. So again, for Paddy's Well, very active and lots of material news flow to come for the rest of the year, essentially. Next slide, please. And that's pretty much it. That's the summary of our 2 focus projects right now. We do have other projects, as I mentioned, in Meekatharra and Nevada. We're currently working on those in the background. But yeah, we don't want to dilute the message. Our focus right now is on lithium and rare earths in the Gascoyne. And now, if there's any questions, be happy to take them.
Thanks, Michael. A comprehensive presentation. I can see why you've captured the market's attention from a share point of view, given the amount of work you're doing and the quality of the projects you've assembled. So congratulations there. Now, as I said at the beginning, it's the opportunity of you, the viewer, to put questions to Michael and Exploration Manager Claudio Sheriff, who, as Michael has touched on, has some significant experience in the sector and has had a lot of recent wins, and hopefully will be generating wins for Voltaic as well. So if you do have a question, put it in the Q&A bottom at the bottom of the screen and I'll put it to the gentleman. But we have had a number come through already, so we'll jump straight into it. And I'll let you guys determine who answers the questions. I'll just throw them at both of you. You touched on at the end of your presentation the focus purely being on lithium and rare earths, although you do have other projects in the portfolio. Why a dual focus on lithium and rare earths right now? Would it have made sense to focus on one over the other, or is it better to focus on both together?
No, I think, well, look, we're only 7 months old, but we didn't want to put all our eggs in one basket, essentially. And as probably most of you and the viewers will be aware, that the market is very fickle, and what's hot one week mightn't necessarily be the next week. So it's not putting all our eggs in one basket. And we've got such strong prospectivity at both projects, and the demand situation for both rare earths and lithium is certainly not going to go away, even though there has been some softening in both rare earths and lithium pricing in general. Certainly the demand is not going away. Rare earths are, the way the geopolitical situation is going across the world, there's only going to be more demand for Western countries to get their own supplies. And you can almost ignore the pricing on the Chinese markets because Western governments are probably going to fund the majority of these projects in the future. So that's one reason for not diverting focus away from rare earths. And then on the lithium, again, yeah, lithium has softened quite a bit, but it's no one can argue that all the OEMs have now committed to building these battery plants, and there simply isn't enough material to supply them if the projections about electric vehicle take-up are genuinely true. And yeah, we've got very active neighbours. We've got Dreadnought, who have had major success from rare earths in the Gascoyne, and we've had Delta, who they've had lots of really encouraging initial results from their Untitled project, like 56 meters at over 1% lithium. So I think we would be foolish not to progress both of our projects right now.
Now, and these questions may jump around a little bit, but I apologise, but they're just as they're coming in. There's a couple of questions here which I'll put together. One was in relation to timing of results from drill programs. What's your expectation there? But also a little bit wider from a news flow point of view, what are some of the key milestones investors should be focusing on over the next 3 to 6 months? I know you put up your Gantt chart that showed everything that's going on, and it's going to be busy, but putting your investor hat on, what should investors be really looking at over the next 3 to 6 months?
Sure, yeah. Okay, so in terms of assays, the labs, we've got a very good relationship with Lab West. They're our lab when we do a multi-element analysis. It does take that bit longer, but it's essentially because we don't want to rule out any prospects. For example, at T3, there's also rare earth potential at T3. And if we didn't do a full multi-element analysis, we wouldn't know that. So that's one factor. So the assays for T3, the first drilling at Andrada, we're saying 5 weeks. We're hoping that we can potentially improve on that. We're currently doing some spectroscopy type. We're arranging for some spectroscopy to happen on some of our chip tray samples, and that will hopefully then allow us to make some claims about the actual identification of, say, spodumene or other lithium-bearing minerals in the samples. So we don't want to make any claims about visuals, because that's a very subjective thing that anyone can claim. We want to have actual hard facts behind it. So we're getting that spectroscopy work done right now. So assays, 5 weeks. Again, there's assays that will continually come from Paddy's well, the drilling. We've only put out the first 2 drill holes. There's 14 left to report on. We should have those again in that 5-week time frame. And then other announcements from both projects will involve the geophysics that's happening, updates on the soil sampling programs, and we're always looking at growing our tenure as well. So that you never know, we might be able to make some announcements on additional tenure being added to the projects. But yeah, really the focus right now is assay results, and also once we have all that data back from both geophysical campaigns, we will put out our next level of targets. So we're always doing the targeting work in the background, but we will then put an announcement out on our next set of targets in both projects, probably around July time. So we have all that geophysical data back, and that's pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, expect a couple of regional updates on both projects as well, just of the progress of the ground surface work, and obviously as we build and expand on that organic growth, and obviously just getting a larger team and a bigger presence out there with the additional funds.
Talking about the team, and maybe this is a question for you, Claudio, that the slide went up which showed the board and the key management, and that's obviously clearly important, but from a project generation, project expansion, exploration activity, the technical team and the quality of that team is really important. And I know, you mentioned it here on this slide, but talk to us about the quality of the team. So who are what's the size of the team, and how active are you as an exploration team sort of out on the ground?
I guess if I take us back to listing, we were out there with Michael pre-listing. We were out there through the whole summer, bigger, the chunkiest part of a month out there at both projects, walking the ground. We've got some of the members that have been with us since those days. We're actively recruiting some project geologists to expand the technical capacity of the team, and we've got some very dedicated field techs, and they're highly specialised field techs with the instruments we capture and obtain our data. So that's intake. That's the most important aspect. Having lots of boots on the ground and lots of fit, dedicated individuals that want to be part of the journey of Voltaic success, and it's proof of just how much we've been able to advance and the value we've been able to generate from just such a small fraction of our tenure and infancy.
And I think what he's trying to say is that any geologists that we have, we don't want them in the office. They have to be out there, boots on the ground. We're not going to make a discovery sitting in West Perth. That's right.
Good to hear. Now, in terms of the prospectivity, if you like, and the comparison of the T3 lithium project compared to Delta's lithium's project, is there any analogy you can see between the two?
Look, when we generated the conceptual targeting with Michael, when we looked at the fertility, we did identify an 80+ kilometre Volta corridor, and we fully believed then that we had at least 40 kilometres, which is 50% of that. The amount of activity, the amount of surface lithium-bearing rock chips that are coming out, the amount of intercepts that Delta was obtaining, the calibre of the companies coming online, both to the northwest, all around us, just is testament to the prospectivity and potential of this area, and not just for lithium, rare earths, and potentially nickel, so base metals, gold. So it's vastly unexplored. Yeah, look, we're in a very good prospective corridor, multiples of these, I can't understate just how much prospectivity and enormous potential we have, because we have only just begun. We have only just systematically begun from one end of a tenure towards the other. So lots of conceptual targets, lots of hard surface and phenomenal targets, and lots of really good work and news flow to come from many quarters.
As you said,
essentially on the what we did initially was collect several hundred rock chips, because there's now over 300, 400 even pegmatites that we've mapped. And the first thing we did was geochemical analysis. And all that means is we've just looked at what are the elements in there and what ratios do you need to be in a fertile system. And we've pretty much demonstrated from one of our first announcements on T3 that we're in what you can call a fertile system for LCT pegmatites. That's just taking ratios like the magnesium to lithium or the niobium to tantalum. And all of that information, all the rock chips are telling us we're in a fertile system. And so that's why we were getting drilling almost straight away. And the drilling is going to basically give us information so that the next level of targets, the next level of drilling is going to be even that bit in a more prospective area. So we've got all the smoke of a lithium system, the same as Delta, basically.
And you talked about the Volta corridor, and implying that it's about sort of 80 Ks or so long. How do you actually test that? So, there's certainly targeting that will help you test that, but, at what stage do you go from an implied sort of corridor length to now we know?
I suppose we're fortunate then at the southern end, T3 South, that everything outcrops at surface. Whereas at T3 North, there's a bit more cover. So at T3 South, we generate all the targets, initial targets from actual boots on the ground rock chipping. Whereas up north, we will probably rely a bit more on geophysics. And that corridor might actually even go far beyond 80 kilometers. We've got Augustus Minerals, who will list, I think, very soon. They've got the continuation of that T3 shear zone. And that could potentially be, several more multiples of 80 kilometers if you continue that whole major fall system. So it might be several more multiples of 80 kilometers, but it'll be a combination of rock chipping, geophysics, but lots and lots of boots on the ground. That's how you generate these targets.
And in terms of the rare earth metallurgical testing you're doing, what's the objective of it, and why do you do this before the next drilling campaign?
Essentially, because it's pointless drilling more into a clay system for rare earths unless you know that you can leach them economically. That's just fundamentally. There could be an argument that, you could just say drill out 100 million ton resource, but the market's not going to give you any value for that if you can't leach it. If you're going to need to use pH 0 or pure sulfuric acid or pure hydrochloric acid, that's never going to be an economic prospect. So we want to do this work up front. We're not married to any of these prospects. We will cut them off and stop focusing on them if it doesn't show any economic potential.
And have you seen any Dreadnought or Hastings style carbonate-type rare earth targets on your ground?
We do have some highly prospective circular elongated features, multiple of these in a line, much like some of the targeting that Hastings and Dreadnought have had the success in drilling out. Kingfisher as well has done a lot of the targeting on the bulk of their ground, and they have some outstanding targets on our eastern tenement boundaries. We believe the Chalba Shear Zone is a multiple of these deep tapping structures that bring up the rare earth fluids, and these regional structures are almost the roadways of these rare earths to come up and form carbonatite deposits and clay-hosted deposits and other types of ferrocarbonatite and pure carbonatite rare earth deposits. So we're in an outstanding structural setting, and we have conceptual targets, and the increased resolution of the geophysical data we're acquiring is going to set us up for some absolutely outstanding targeting to complement the existing carbonatite targets we have so far.
It's an interesting location in that, and I'm paraphrasing a couple of questions here. It's gone from no activity a few years ago and nobody really there to now probably one of the most, one of the not hottest, but one of the busiest places in Western Australia for exploration. How closely does everybody watch what everyone else is up to?
Yeah, look, certainly I think we're all keeping an eye on what everyone's doing. There was a meeting recently up at Gascoyne Junction where a lot of the explorers in the region got to meet for the first time, which was really useful. And I think, yeah, we all should essentially work together because it's in everyone's best interest that we all succeed, because it could really be the next Pilbara, this Gascoyne region. Like, it's got all different critical minerals prospectivity. And it hasn't had that exploration of other regions like Southern Cross or pretty much any other part of WA. And the history behind it is because it's never had a state-sponsored gold battery, a place where the prospectors could bring their pay dirt and get crushed and weighed and paid for. So the Gascoyne, for a peculiar reason, has never had a battery, and that's why it's just not as explored as everywhere else in WA.
And like I said, I'm just going to throw the questions as they're coming through. You don't seem to have much activity planned for September. Is there an obvious reason for that? Or is that, for shareholders or those looking at the company, is there a reason why that's the case and why that should make complete sense?
Basically, yeah. In the Gascoyne, the Gascoyne's primary income comes from pastoral work. So all the pastoralists, their busiest time of the year is September, and that's when they do all their mustering. And if you turn up on their tenure during that time, you really basically piss them off. And we're highly conscious of having good relationships with the pastoralists, so we would never we basically go to other projects like in Meekatharra, where we don't have such issues as the mustering season. So it's all about working with the local stakeholders, the pastoralists, and keeping them happy.
Now, we do have time for a few more questions, but I'll throw one which is probably more of a corporate question. And I think you sort of answered it in the beginning when you talked to your recent capital raising. But Michael, you did mention, and I'm just going to read it verbatim, you did mention you had enormous over-demand for the recent cap raise, including from resource funds. Were there any family offices or other listed entities that subscribed in the cap raise?
Yeah, look, it was quite surprising the amount of interest we had from the more kind of companies or funds that would only look at, say, mid-tiers and up. So yeah, there's been lots of resource type funds and bigger institutional funds that are now part of the register, and high net worths in like the likes of Singapore and Hong Kong and London. And yeah, I think it's just a nice testament that someone is now woken up to what's going on at Delta Lithium and the prospectivity there. And they've seen the success maybe that Dreadnought have had over the last 2 or 3 years. And perhaps that is now why we're getting some nice interest from these more, institutional type investors. And we're very happy because now we've got a more institutional, like a stable register than before, which was always our objective. We just didn't think we would get there this quickly.
Like you say, 7 months since listing, it is quite remarkable. Now, do you have a ratio that you work to, and some companies are different and you may not, but do you have a ratio you work towards this is how much corporate should cost versus this is how much we want to spend on exploration and our exploration activities?
Look, we're going to try and spend as much in the ground as possible. At least 80-90% of this raise we will hope to put into the ground. So we've got a very modest, we're very frugal in how we operate, and that's how we've managed to achieve what we have. Not committing to huge programs initially, and not having huge cash burns. And we're not going to change that tact going forward just because now we've got a lot more cash in the bank. We're going to have the same frugal approach. But yeah, the majority of dollars in the ground.
Now, just coming up to the final couple of questions. Now, you do clearly the focus is on the West Australian projects, but there is a question here from someone. Can you just give us a little snapshot or a quick overview of what's happening with the US leases? Are they just being sort of kept and maintained and while all the directions here, or is there a bit of work going on over there?
We haven't done the initial work yet, but we do plan to do some initial work, such as rock chipping, maybe in Q3, Q4. We're just trying to line up contractors for that. But essentially the project, it's very close to a historic cobalt mine, which was operating over 100 years ago. And there's reports of very high grade cobalt. There's also some neighbors, TSX listed neighbors in the very near vicinity who've had quite nice nickel cobalt drill results in recent times as well. So we're certainly not going to give up the project, and we will do some work once we get to it. We're just so consumed really with our small team for the last 6 months on the Gascoyne that we just hadn't had a chance to look at it yet. But fortunately in the US, all you have to do is pay your annual fee. You don't have to have any minimum expenditure commitments on those Nevada claims. So we're definitely going to keep the project for as long as we have, as long as we can, until we get the first boots on ground later on this year.
A laser-like focus, well-funded, a clear focus on delivering value out of initially these exciting West Australian assets. Claudio, Michael, thanks both for your time. Much to do, much to watch. For everyone who tuned in, thanks for tuning in. And if you have any questions additional to this presentation, clearly you can reach out to the company directly, and I know Michael and Claudio would be more than happy to answer any questions you have. We look forward to watching your progress. Thanks both for your time, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Paddy.
Thanks, David.